I've had a lot of conversations about black metal, and trust me when I say this, I plan on making many more in the future. But one topic that I've never discussed, and it really got me thinking throughout the weeks, is what was the best year for black metal? What particular year since black metal has been around would be considered to be its golden year? Take into account quality, quantity, impact, influence, and what albums really stood out in a particular year where you start asking yourself, what was the best year to be a black metal fan? And my answer would be 1996. There are a lot of releases that came out in the year 1996 under the style of black metal, and even with everything I'm going to be talking about here, this only scratches the surface of what was released. Although what I am going to be talking about in somewhat rapid fire because of how much there is, these are what I think are the essentials, the must-know, the greats, and other hidden gems that I don't see that many people talking about here. But before I get into that, if you're wondering what's playing in the background, it would be the debut full-length album by Niflheim, an album that I've been finding myself obsessing over the past handful of weeks. I mean, I'm even wearing the Niflheim shirt for a reason. But even though I'm talking about albums from 1996, obviously, this album came out in 1995, so I'm, I guess, kind of cheating here, but had to play it just solely because I cannot seem to get sick of this album. It is just ferocious, vicious, black thrash, and I think the best way possible, and this is just another essential, I feel like, for any just adrenaline junkie in black metal. Starting it off with Abigor Opus 4. When it comes to Abigor, they are one of the most consistent black metal bands to have ever formed. And when it came to the 90s, this decade, Abigor made it its bitch. Every release that they did in this particular decade is top notch. That if I were to pick another year for the golden year for black metal, Abigor would have been included because they were just steamrolling through this decade. And Opus 4 was originally supposed to be a double EP, from what I understand, and they just combined it together so you get two for the price of one. Hence why towards the middle of this album, production and songwriting kind of changes a little bit. But again, it's Abigor. Their songwriting is top-notch, it's stellar. It always feels very mature, but also very energetic at the same time. That when it comes to consistency, like I said, Abigor are second to no one. The debut full-length album by Falkenbach was another easy inclusion. If you enjoy most particularly late-era Bathory of the Viking metal sound all the way up to its end in 2004, literally everything by Falkenbach is for you. And I personally feel like the debut full-length album is a tremendous representation of what it's capable of doing. Blending styles, again, of Viking metal, folk metal, and raw atmospheric black metal that's nothing too unlistenable, mainly because the production value on here is very well done. The songwriting is top-notch, and again, I can't emphasize it enough. If you enjoy the Viking metal era Bathory, listen to Falkenbach immediately. Speaking of which, I would also include Bathory with his album Blood on Ice. And I'm very aware that out of everything I will say in this video, this is my hottest take, because I know a lot of you guys will not consider this to be black metal, which is totally fair, as this would be the Viking metal era of Bathory, and Quorthon isn't doing any harsh vocals, he's all clean singing. And while technically Viking metal is an offshoot from black metal, I can understand as to how this feels a bit cheap of an inclusion. But I'm including it here because while vocally it's not black metal, instrumentally and atmospherically wise anyway, it resembles a lot of its characteristics. And I personally feel like out of everything Quorthon did with Bathory that was in the style of Viking metal, this is arguably his most underrated piece out of everything he did, because I don't see that many people hyping up this particular album. And again, while it borderlines on black metal, I feel like from my personal standards, it just kind of fits into this topic for the video. But again, don't sleep on this album. Even though it's a Viking metal album, instrumentally it still resembles a lot of its black metal characteristics. Burzum, Philosophem. another obvious inclusion because more than likely so many people have been introduced to black metal because of this album. Obviously a very raw, atmospheric approach for this style of music, blending a lot of ambience together, that its compositions, although very simplistic and somewhat repetitive, would be such a staple for this genre that would paint the blueprints for an endless horde of black metal bands to follow up with. And again, it's an essential, and that's a fact. It's not an opinion here. This is a very monumental piece of black metal. I know it was originally recorded in 1993, but it wouldn't see the light of day, its music being released to the audience, until 1996. So it counts here, and again, I know I'm just preaching to the choir, Burzum's Philosophem, an essential as well. The debut and sole full-length album by the group Kvist. If you don't know this and you're a black metal fan, you need to change that immediately. I know it's more on the kind of like hidden gem section of Norwegian black metal, but oh, it is so freaking good, and it's rare that I see people talk about this. It's nothing really groundbreaking or reinventing the wheel, but all the components you would want in a black metal album in the mid-2000s, it's all compiled on this one full-length album, and it is so freaking good. I'm not going to spoil that much for you guys, but if you want top-notch songwriting in black metal 1996, definitely check out Kvist. Winterland, welcome my last chapter. I would state out of everything I'll be talking about in this video, my personal favorite black metal album to be released in the year 1996 is right here. This is Swedish melodic black metal masterpiece right here, simply put. It takes obviously the approach that Dissection was doing with adding in more melodicism with black metal, but making it all the more emotive and melancholic while still not sacrificing any of the adrenaline and aggression you would want in this style of music. Seriously, it really hits all the right notes here, and the compositions, the ambience, the synthesizers, it is too good for words, honestly, some of it. And again, it never lets up with the energy you would want in this style of music. I would wish I could include Dissection in this video, but Storm the Light's Bane came out in 1995, so they kind of need to be passed up here. But Winterland, welcome my last chapter. Too good for words, and another album you should all know if you're a black metal fan. Diabolical Masquerade, Raven Dusk in My Heart. The most straightforward and stripped down album in the Diabolical Masquerade discography, that even though my personal favorite will always be Nightwork, that goes way more into the realms of avant-garde and really going quite crazy with the symphonic approaches. As I stated, this is more straightforward and stripped down, but it tends to be a lot more aggressive. And from what I remember reading in interviews, Andre was really influenced by a lot of the Norwegian black metal bands around this time. Thus, you can hear a lot of inspiration from like Emperor and Satyricon when you pay attention to not only the guitar riffs, but especially the keyboards and synthesizers on this album. And it's just a very, very well written and aggressive symphonic black metal album that sounds very diabolical and evil. And again, for anyone who likes more of a straightforward approach within the style of black metal, you definitely need to know this as well. Mysticum, In the Streams of Inferno. Apologies in advance that I have the crappy repress with this really dark and really hard to look at album artwork. But In the Streams of Inferno by Mysticum is one of the pioneering albums to that, of blending both industrial and black metal together. An idea that at the time, blending electronic or really any other elements of music together with black metal was still kind of like an odd thing to come across, and Mysticum really pushed boundaries with this album right here. It sounds very mechanical and has that that cybergenetic feeling towards the guitar riffs and vocals and percussions, that it doesn't really feel as if it's too off the beaten path from what again the big names were doing like Mayhem and Emperor, while still being adventurous with it. That again, Norway was just really cranking out a lot of bangers within this time period, and Mysticum, even though they kind of still do get quite a bit of recognition for this particular like niche little thing of blending both industrial and black metal together, I still don't feel like they really got their fair shake of recognition. And if you don't know of them, you definitely need to check out In the Streams of Inferno. Hecate Enthroned upon Promethean Shores. So many people sweep this band under the rug that it's just a cradle of filth, a knockoff band, and it's not worth paying attention to. And for those people who say that, it's clear as day you've never actually listened to Hecate Enthroned. Because one of the big differences between the two is that even though they both play in the style of symphonic black metal, Cradle of Filth is way more in the realms of like that gothic aesthetic and sound, where Hecate Enthroned is way more straightforward and aggressive with their approach, that I feel like they don't get the recognition that they rightfully deserve. Even though this is only an EP and not a full length like most of the releases I'll be talking about in this video, it's still a great addition of just black metal to listen to in your playlist. And again, just really aggressive, dark, evil, symphonic black metal that too many people ignore. And the last album that I have that was released in 1996 physically, until I have to go back to showcasing everything with the JPEG, is Nokturnal Mortum, Lunar Poetry. Often considered to be a demo, which is hard to characterize by most fans, as this demo is 45 minutes long, and a lot of people consider it to be a full length. Regardless if it's a demo or full length, it's phenomenal black metal, blending obviously black metal, symphonic, and folk elements together seamlessly. A group that really, they're kind of a league all their own, because typically bands either play around with one or the other, symphonic or folk. But Nokturnal Mortum always blended it together, and Lunar Poetry, even though it's one of their earliest releases, is honestly one of their best representations of these styles being played side by side. And Nokturnal Mortum has always done great material, but early on they were putting out some phenomenal stuff, and Lunar Poetry is one of their highlights. Satyricon, Nemesis Divinia, their pinnacle for most people in their discography, and I would say out of their most explosive and monumental sounding, this is it. Guitar riffs are hot as all hellfire, vocal performance is super energetic, the drums are absolutely pummeling. It just really gives off this climactic sound that Satyricon during their early days really had down very well. And as I stated, if you really want the pinnacle of their discography, this is the album to listen to. Sacramentum, Far Away from the Sun, another Swedish black metal album, gets it into this video. Again, diving into the realms of melodic black metal, really similar to that of Winterland, Dawn, and Dissection. Only the difference between Sacramentum and everything I just said is they always felt a bit more atmospheric and mystical sounding in terms of their overall vibe and aesthetics going on. And this album, really for most people, including myself, is the pinnacle of their discography. Old Man's Child, Born of the Flickering. Another album that's in the realms of melodic black metal, similar to that of Sacramentum, Vinterland, Dissection, that I've talked about before. However, what I've noticed about Old Man's Child that's a little bit different is not only are they from Norway, but the usage of keyboards almost gives off a somewhat symphonic effect. Plus the guitar riffs, as awesome as they're played, I always felt like there was a bit more of like this thrash kind of essence kind of scattered throughout the album. But overall, again, if you want just killer riffs and all the components you would want in a melodic black metal album that has like this take no prisoners, no holds barred like riffs attitude with it, definitely check out this album as well. Bethlehem, Dictus Te Nacare is an album that I always find myself finding another excuse to talk about here on my channel, but can you blame me? I mean, this wasn't intentional, but it came out in the year 1996. A big pioneer to that of the style of music known as DSBM, which no, I don't need to tell you what that stands for, because I want this video to stay up here on my channel. But it gave off a very more emotive take for the style of black metal that not really any band was doing during this time period of 1996 and paved the way for so many others to introduce more depressing and emotive takes within extreme metal, more particularly black metal, along with Rainer Landfermann's vocal performance that is second to none, the instrumentation on here that's very straightforward and easy to follow along with. It's just overall a very top-notch, emotive, insane black metal album that I absolutely adore, that just came out in 1996 that perfectly fits this video. Judas Iscariot, Thy Dying Light, one of the big titans to that of United States black metal that's cold, evil, and hateful as they come. It really does feel like the intention for this project and album was to take the sounds of what was happening in the Norwegian black metal scene like Burzum, Darkthrone, and Immortal, and applying that to the United States black metal sound. And Judas Iscariot was definitely ahead of the curve by doing so, and I can't emphasize it enough. A must-know if you are looking for one of the pioneers and titans to that of United States black metal. Marduk, Heaven Shall Burn When We Are Gathered. One of the many albums by Marduk that their straightforward blitz and all-out assault of black metal is present on this album, like everything they would do before and after. The only difference that I noticed with this particular album that it's worth mentioning here is that it feels a lot darker and more grim compared to everything else. I know Marduk tends to either be on the satanic approach for black metal or the very militant World War II themed approach for black metal, that it kind of affects the vibe and aesthetics a little bit with their songwriting, but with Heaven Shall Burn, it feels a bit more on the satanic approach, obviously, and because of that, it feels darker, it feels more grim, it feels eviler sounding, and it really plays quite well into the cliches of black metal. But again, it's a Marduk album. It's very explosive, super high energy, blast beats galore basically is what this album is, that if you just want all thrills with no fills in the approach for black metal, Marduk's Heaven Shall Burn is a must listen. Dimmu Borgir, Stormblast. I'm very well aware that Dimmu Borgir has left a sour taste among the black metal fans when you look at their late era stuff where it becomes very accessible and they've really lost their edge, which, you know, I try to see the good in albums, but I can totally understand as to why people strongly dislike late era Dimmu Borgir. But don't let that deviate you away from their early material, that really this is where their best kind of lies. I know this album has a bit more of a classical approach when you look at how the keyboards are being played on the first half of the album, but the second half they go a bit more aggressive with it while still maintaining that symphonic black metal approach that they've kind of done since their beginnings. So I just want to bring this album up here, not only because it's another album from 1996, but do not ignore Dimmu Borgir's early stuff because late era is kind of a big flop. Seriously, they have some gems in their discography. Cradle of Filth, Dusk and Her Embrace. Just like Dimmu Borgir, I'm very aware that Cradle of Filth has left a sour taste among the black metal fan base. When you particularly look at the turn of the millennia in their catalog, they go a lot more accessible and more into the gothic metal region, that their black metal sound and aesthetic has been completely evaporated. And while I'm aware as well that they've kind of brought back that style with later era albums around like the late 2010s, I do feel like their pinnacle that should not be ignored because it's Cradle of Filth is Dusk and Her Embrace, because this album sounds twisted, it sounds diabolical, it sounds like a nightmare fairy tale come to life is how everything's kind of played out with its concept and sound. I do feel like Dani Filth's vocal performance on here matches up with pace among a lot of the other black metal vocalist grades out there. And it's just a very twisted, gothic-fueled, symphonic black metal album that, again, I do feel like it doesn't really get the proper recognition among like the die-hard black metal fans, which again I get because their appearance and presentation and sound is more accessible among others that I have and will talk about. But just like Dimmu Borgir, do not ignore early era Cradle of Filth because of some flops that they have in their catalog. Samael, Passage. While my favorite will always be Ceremony of Opposites for their super blunt, straightforward, riff-heavy approach for black metal that kind of borderlines in the realms of hardcore with their songwriting, blending it together with black metal, I do admire a lot their follow-up, Passage, because this is where they start to be a bit more ambitious and really bringing forth elements of electronic and industrial into their approach that it's kind of split down the line 50-50 with how they balance out these styles of music, and they really relish within it. That I feel like personally this is their most underrated release in their catalog, because Samael has always been a great black metal band, but people tend to admire like their first like 5 to 7 years, and everything after that tends to be ignored. And I personally feel like Passage is one of those underrated albums that needs a bit more love, that it showcases progression and evolution in the style of black metal that, again, I can't emphasize enough. I feel like it's truly an underrated and hidden gem in their discography as well. Crimson Moon, To Embrace the Vampiric Blood, another heavy hitter to that of United States black metal that, compared to everything else I've talked about thus far, it's a bit more raw and primitive. Although what gives it a bit of its own unique flair is how the keyboards and synthesizers are utilized, gives off a bit more of like this dungeon synth type of aesthetic and sound, blended with the raw and very necro fueled black metal energy that it gives off. Overall, another great album in United States black metal that's worthy of checking out. Lunar Aurora, Welter Gengar. Another great representation of how in the year of 1996, black metal was just on a tear. And this is just such a killer album from start to finish. Everything is just so explosive and monumental. The drum performance, the guitar riffs, the vocals, the composition of the synthesizers. It is just all so incredible. Maybe not really breaking new grounds for what black metal was doing during this time period, but if you want an album in black metal that has all the components you would want and then some for just a top-notch performed and written black metal album, this right here, too good. Root, Kagerace. Now, Root is a lot more grounded in the realms of traditional heavy metal compared to really any other black metal band I can really think of. I remember having a conversation with a friend and we discussed it that Root is basically the black metal version for Manila Road, is kind of the best way to describe them. And again, Root is another very, very consistent band that's never really put out anything bad. It's either range between good to great, and this is one of their albums that I would consider to be great. If you're looking for black metal way more rooted in the realms of traditional heavy metal, this is a must-know. The debut full-length album by Arcturus, where it's a lot more of a synth-driven atmospheric black metal album. But this is a little bit before they went really off the rails with the experimentation that they would do later on. If you're looking for bands similar to that of Emperor, which I know is a very cliche comparison with any kind of like synth-related black metal band, but if you're looking for more melodicism and higher energy with that approach, definitely check out the debut full-length album by Arcturus. Mystifier, The World Is So Good, Who Made It Doesn't Live Here. An album title that is really hard to forget, but an album that will just kick you in the face and never let up. I would say out of everything in this video, or really any black metal release that was put out in 1996, if you're looking for the heaviest album within this style, listen to Mystifier. Super obnoxious, aggressive, barbaric, extreme metal that's in the realms almost to an extent of like war metal, as it's kind of characterized, similar to that of like Blasphemy and the Archgoats, Beharets. Those names is what Mystifier tends to find its crowd with. And this full-length album, which I believe is their third in their discography is just as I stated, obnoxious and aggressive as anything else they've ever done. And if you're a fan of war metal, Bastille black metal, or the combination of both black metal and death metal, you already know this. Abigail, Intercourse and Lust, a Japanese black thrash band that gave off more of this punk flavor to the style of music. In terms of its aesthetic and attitude, it's a lot more perverse and vicious compared to its predecessors, that if you're an adrenaline junkie, this is a must-know. Forgotten Woods, The Curse of Mankind. Straightforward, stripped down, raw, aggressive black metal. Vocal performance has a little bit of desperation and depression to a certain extent. Nothing that I would call DSBM, but the similarities between Forgotten Woods and Burzum are really present on this particular album. It runs for 70 minutes long, and while guitar riffs can kind of be a bit repetitive, it's still thoroughly enjoyable, especially if you're looking for an album to just engulf you in that bleak, harsh atmosphere that black metal is just so known for. Sagoth, Starfire burning upon the ice-veiled throne of Ultima Thule. I've stated it before and I'll state it again a million more times. Sagoth is basically summoning with blast beats. How can I not like them? And everything Sagoth has done, literally every full length, stellar, top notch. Would recommend all of it. Just talking about this one because obviously it was released in the year of 1996. Now, if you were looking for high energy and that explosive sound for extreme metal, Sagoth will give you that. However, their real selling point is how they're able to make all of their albums and songs feel like such an odyssey, but nothing that's pretentious. It's always just so fun. It feels like, again, you're going on this massive adventure into a completely different universe while still being memorable, while still having catchy riffs, while still having high energy. Nothing that feels like filler to just add in between the lines. It's always just top-notch stuff, and Sagoth delivers on this album like any other thing they would do from the years after. Aura Noir, Black Thrash Attack. I'm not being lazy here, but I feel like it's really straightforward. The album title alone says it all. December Wolves, Till 10 Years. A black metal band that I've never seen anyone ever talk about. And while this album isn't anything off the beaten path for the style of black metal, it has literally all the components you could think of with its very straightforward approach. It's just done really well. The riffs are memorable. The vocal performance is varied, thus it kind of gives off some standout features when you listen to it track by track. And just overall, it's nothing groundbreaking, but it's just very, very well done black metal from the United States. And the final inclusion for this video will go to Bluthaus Nord, Memoria Vetusta, the Fathers of the Icy Age. Now, Bluthaus Nord has always been, I feel like personally, on the cutting edge when it comes to black metal. They are one of the pioneers to that, of anything experimental in this style of music, right up there with Decibel Omega. They've always been neck and neck. However, when you look at really anything Bluthaus Nord did in the 90s, it's more straightforward, but they've always been interested with being ambitious and experimenting in some kind of ways. When you take into account some of the clean vocals on this album, kind of has more of like this choir type of effect to it that makes it a bit more atmospheric and dives more into different realms and territories that not many black metal bands were doing. Along with the songwriting, it's a bit more unorthodox. It's not just, repetitive blasting and tremolo pick guitars throughout. They've always had transitions to shake things up and make it interesting. Even with this particular album, where it's a bit more straightforward compared to the rest of the material that they would do decades after, Memoria Vetusta, the Fathers of the Icy Age, showcases that even at their most bare bones, Bluthaus Nord still delivers top-notch music. And that'll do it for this video, guys. I'm very well aware that there are a lot of 1996 black metal releases that I did not include in this video. Even at my notes, I had to cut out a few, mainly because I don't want this video to drag out too long. But really curious to know what you thought of this. What other 1996 black metal releases did I not include that you think should have been mentioned? Better yet, what do you think is the best year for black metal? If you don't have one particular year, then tell me some of your favorite years down in the comments. And that is that. So like always, guys, make sure you guys drink plenty of water to stay hydrated, and have a great day.